We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are honored to work and serve on this land. Reachability stands with the protesters across Canada, the United States, and across the globe demanding an end to police brutality and racism. We acknowledge the deep and powerful challenges faced by the Black community in Nova Scotia, Canada, and beyond. Welcome, everybody. It's Thursday, another day in National Accessibility Week. We here at Reachability are proud to be the provincial hosts for this national event. And we'd like to remind you that there's still lots to come this evening, tomorrow, Saturday, right up until June 6th. You can still register for events. Just go to the Reachability website at www.reachability.org. Welcome. Welcome to Accessibility and Inclusion in the Post-Secondary Environment Part 2. This was a popular topic, so we have decided to split it into 2 sessions. And today we would like to welcome, first up, we'd like to welcome Joe Fraser. He's with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Nova Scotia Community College. Next up, I would like to welcome Gloria Johnston, Manager of Accessibility Services, Mount St. Vincent University. Hello, Gloria. Quinta Adams, Director of Student Academic Success with Dalhousie University. Jennifer Green, Manager of Student Accessibility, St. Mary's University. And I'd like to welcome back Katie Bauer, a master's student in sciences at Dalhousie University and a student advocate. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Yesterday was a very busy day, and there were lots of questions for our panelists yesterday. If anyone is wondering or would like to go back and watch yesterday's panel, it is on YouTube and Facebook. You can just search Reachability. But to begin with, I'd like to meet everyone here, and I'm curious if maybe we could start one by one, perhaps in the order that I introduced you, and you could just tell us a little bit if you have a relationship to disability, why you're in the job you're in, a little bit about yourselves. So if we can start with you, Joe.
Sure, thanks so much, Deborah, for the introduction, and thank you also for the land acknowledgement and for acknowledging the recent racial violence. As members of equity-seeking groups, we certainly do stand together. My relationship to accessibility in post-secondary education is both personal and professional. So I would start by acknowledging my own non-disabled privilege. But I do have folks close to me in my family that do have disabilities. My stepsister has cerebral palsy, and as a result is really profoundly disabled by the barriers that she experiences around her, both physical and social. And as a result of that, post-secondary education just was something that was really inaccessible for her. And I compare that with my own experience and of both studying in and working in post-secondary education, and really acknowledging that it's my privilege that has created that difference between our experiences. And I'm also the parent of a young person with a mental health disability who is currently navigating post-secondary education and experiencing significant barriers in that experience. In terms of professional connection, in my role as Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with NSCC, I have sort of a leadership and coordination role in relation to the college's accessibility work. And I'm also the steward of the college's mental wellness strategy. So lots of opportunities to connect with some really interesting and impactful work. Going a little deeper in terms of my relationship or orientation to the work, I am always cognizant that I'm working in, I think I can probably speak for the other panelists, that we're all working in institutions that were really founded on and for a long time perpetuated ideologies of ableism and colonialism and racism and sexism, all the isms, but also organizations that are increasingly aware of and tuned into the needs and really the rights of an increasingly diverse population, and organizations that are just really motivated and inspired presently to do better with accessibility. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Welcome. Can we learn a little bit about you?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciated the invitation to join this panel, and I was quite excited to talk about the Mount a little bit. And it's kind of a new home for me. I'm fairly new. I've only been there at the Mount since August. And I feel very fortunate to have joined a team of really hardworking, dedicated, passionate people about inclusive learning. So I feel like I found a nice kind of niche to kind of settle in for a while, I hope. I'm currently with University of New Brunswick. I'm doing my PhD part-time. And when I started teaching there during my PhD was the first time I'd been exposed to accessibility services through my students. And which was really ironic because I had gone through all of my education as a person with multiple disabilities and had never accessed accessibility services. I didn't know they existed. And, looking back, I was kind of like, man, I could have really used some help there. That would have been great to have the support that I honestly was clueless. I had a student who had an interpreter come join my class, and I learned a ton, and it was such an amazing experience. And then I was opened up to this network of people who worked in accessibility and people who were really being advocates and students who were working with faculty and really kind of collaboratively. And it was really eye-opening. So that was kind of my first kind of introduction to the people who are working on the back end of academia with all of this amazing work. And then I headed up to the Yukon for about 5 years. And I was working with Yukon University at the Whitehorse Correctional Center. And I was the coordinator and program instructor and coordinator for the satellite campus for the university in the jail. So we had a vast, diverse learners, and on top of intergenerational trauma and things like really high rates of FAS, like much higher than territorial or national averages. You also had multiple learning disabilities, undiagnosed, diagnosed, and it was a extremely stimulating teaching environment. And so we worked on a lot of just kind of diverse needs and then also like pro-social behaviors. So it was really seeing the student as kind of like an intersectional person of all these different identities, and how do you kind of advocate for that, and kind of, especially in jail, because there's a lot of external and internal advocacy. But that kind of changed my pathway. I kind of always thought I'd go back to teaching at university full time, and I was like, no, I'm good. I really want to work with students, and I really want to be a little bit more like kind of on the ground. So when I found my place at the Mount, I felt very appreciative of that, and so far so good. It's been an amazing experience so far.
Great, thank you. Quenta, let's hear a little bit about meeting you.
Sure, thank you, Deborah. It really is. I think I echo Joe and Gloria. Thanks for the invitation. I was really looking forward to today. It's nice in Nova Scotia because we have an opportunity to work together anyway outside of our institutions, because we all have common goals. And so it's really great to have an opportunity to sit with these wonderful folks this afternoon, or let me say it will be. My professional history, I've worked in the field of education for some time now. I used to work for the Department of Education in their adult education branch a long time ago before moving to Dalhousie, where I've been pretty much settled in student affairs. And I've always worked with equity-seeking groups. And it wasn't until really that I came to Dalhousie that I had an opportunity through a mentor at the time who was unfortunately since moved on to an institution in BC, who really brought, I think, some really good questions to me to think about, some considerations in terms of some of the work that we do. And so for the past, I'm not sure, several years, I have been working again in student affairs with the Student Accessibility Center as part of my portfolio. I, like Gloria, have a fantastic team. We are strong advocates for and alongside our students. Nothing too big, too small, in terms of students bringing challenges or questions to us. We really take their lead. It's really important for us in terms of the narrative. And that's kind of been a big piece of my own development in this area. And thank you, Joe, for acknowledging your privilege. I will do the same as well. And just because I know that I still have room to grow. I think I was speaking to someone earlier today about, our commitment to lifelong learning, and it's really important in this particular field in terms of supporting underrepresented and equity-seeking groups. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and folks who are out there watching, don't hesitate to ask us some questions. Thanks.
Agreed. Thank you, Quinta. Jennifer from St. Mary's. Hello.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect.
Just fine.
Great. Again, like everyone else, thank you so much for having me. And I was really looking forward to today because I am new in my role here. So it's going to be great to get some new perspectives and to hear what everybody else is doing. I grew up in a very small town in northwestern Ontario and Minnesota. And I began working over a decade ago with Indigenous youth, and that's where I first started working with complex trauma behaviors and a lot of diverse abilities and disabilities as well. I initially wanted to be a police officer, and I very quickly learned that being a police officer was not my calling because there are so many reasons why people do the things they do and why they are the way they are, and it wasn't enough for me to just meet them and then charge them. So I quickly steered away from there, and I got into social work, and I continued to work with youth in our Indigenous communities over those periods of times. I moved to Nova Scotia in 2012, where I did my undergrad in sociology, and during that time, I worked in the shelter system in a lot of crisis-based situations. And again, what's incredible about, these things during my life is that many people have disabilities or diverse abilities, but they're labeled as being criminal or other things instead of us being able to recognize that there are other things going on. And from those experiences, I moved into a leadership position managing a residential treatment center in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. And I did that, and I was able to manage a team of 6 excellent and skilled child and youth care practitioners, and I learned a great deal from them. And then I did a master's degree in lifelong learning. And during that time, I got involved with the field of disabilities and worked in nonprofit and managed an organization for a few years. And during that time, sat on a regional committee to promote the self-advocacy of people with disabilities. And that's, so I finished my graduate degree, and it's led me to where I am now. I just finished up doing some teaching in post-secondary as well. in the Disability Supports and Services program, where the majority of our students identified as having a disability as well. So that was some really excellent learning for me in that regard. And just happy to be here and getting adjusted into my role, and I look forward to the questions ahead.
Great, thank you, Jen. And lastly, we have Katie. Katie Bauer, can you hear me? Oh, there she is. Yeah, can we meet you a little bit, Katie?
Sure. I just want to first say thank you for inviting me back. I do think it's really important to have the student voice on these types of panels, so I greatly appreciate you guys taking that into consideration. But in terms of my background, I do have a severe psychiatric disability, and I've gone through 3 different educational institutions in Nova Scotia, the first being NASCAD with my BFA. I went to Mount St. Vincent for my BA, and now I'm at Dal for my MSc. So I do have some interesting perspectives in terms of how the schools operate differently within the province, and kind of can compare a little bit for people that are maybe debating between a few. But also, basically at the beginning of my time at Mount St. Vincent, I became a public advocacy speaker for people with particularly mental health issues at the time, and moved on to talking about disability generally. So I've been doing that for about 8 years now, on and off. And then I went and I worked with Students Nova Scotia, which is a provincial advocacy group representing students, post-secondary students. And I wrote the Disable the Label report, which kind of looked at the policies and practices of disability offices provincially and institution-wise. So I have a bit of background in different areas that way as well. So yeah, I'm just really happy to be here and answer anybody's questions that from a student perspective. I know it can be a bit different than everyone else who may be working in the field. So hopefully I can bring something to the panel that way.
Thank you. And Quinta just posted the link to your paper for Disable the Label. It's in the chat box, so people can follow that. Thank you. Quick on the links there, Quinta. All right, so I'll just read. Now I have some questions that had been submitted previously, but I also want to invite anybody watching that is registered for the event can put a question into the public chat, and we will address those as long as we have time. We're going to aim for completing this roughly just under 1 hour from now. So we'll try and wrap this up by 4:15. But I'd like to begin maybe Joe, we can begin a little bit with you. If you could highlight any particular initiative, or what's happening at with accessibility services at NSCC these days.
Thanks so much, Deborah, for the question. If I could, I think I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about an evolution, or sort of the journey at NSCC just over the last couple of years, because some thinking is evolving in ways that we're really excited about. So I'd like to share that with you. NSCC has always really aspired to be an access college or an access institution. And what we mean by that is that we're accessible in a number of different ways. So we're geographically accessible through our 17 physical locations across the province, from Yarmouth to Sydney. We're financially accessible in that tuition for our core programming is about half of what a student would pay for a year in an undergraduate program. We also have an accessible admissions policy. So rather than holding seats for the most qualified applicants, we are allocating seats on a first qualified, first in basis. We work hard to be physically accessible. That's ongoing work, but just constantly auditing and assessing and upgrading physical structures. And we also work hard to have accessibility built into our programming. So one of our 5 academic schools is the School of Access, Education and Languages. And the School of Access, Education and Languages really creates pathways for individuals to enter post-secondary who might not otherwise go to post-secondary. And so, for example, one of our programs is our Achieve program, which is made up mostly of students with disabilities. So for a long time, we've been very focused on this notion of being an access college. And I think we've done a decent job of that, and we've had some good success, and we remain really, really committed to that. But we have had a few projects that we've undertaken over the last few years to try to enhance accessibility in different ways that have kind of pushed our thinking into some new directions. So I'll just share briefly with you some of those projects. So the first was a project that we did in partnership with IBM, the big tech company IBM. So IBM has a leadership development program where it will deploy up-and-comers within the company to go and work with other organizations on complex policy issues or projects. So we, NSCC, we were the really, really grateful hosts of 3 IBMers from 3 different countries who came and spent a whole month with us at the college working together on a project to create an accessibility planning framework. And so to have those international perspectives from folks from the tech world, not post-secondary, was just really interesting to kind of generate innovative thinking and new ways of thinking about accessibility. The second project we did was, I would probably categorize it as action research. So with one particular classroom at our Truro campus, we worked with a cohort of students, some of whom had disabilities, to really try to envision from the student's perspective, what would a fully accessible learning experience look like? And so we employed a community engagement model with this group of students to try to create a container for their thinking and discussion and for them to give us feedback and information about what a fully accessible learning experience would look like. And the idea behind that project was to try and shift that burden. So right now we have a burden on a student to encounter a barrier, flag it, request an accommodation, and receive that. So the idea behind the project was, what if in this little petri dish, we could create an environment where the burden was actually on the institution to proactively create a fully accessible learning experience so that we would negate the whole need to request that accommodation. So that was a really interesting project that we undertook. Of course, we didn't achieve a fully accessible learning experience, but we had some good learning coming out of it. And the third project was, there was an identified need within the college to develop an educational equity policy. And so we spent a couple of years trying to figure out what that actually means, and did lots of research and analysis and engagement. And in 2018, we did implement an educational equity policy that we're really, really proud of. It's something that only a handful of post-secondaries in the country actually have. And so the thinking, the research, the analysis that kind of went into that project of figuring out what educational equity means in a Nova Scotia context also really helped to fuel new thinking. And so I think those 3 projects were kind of catalysts. And what came from that was, again, maintaining that focus on being an access institution, but we sort of tethered that thinking around accessibility to the broader notion of equity, and really thinking about not only equitable access to education. So of course, buildings have to be physically accessible so that folks can get inside the door. Of course, admissions have to be accessible so that folks can access programming. But aside from equitable access, what is the experience of education for a student with a disability or some other demographic difference? Is that an equitable experience of learning and studying at NSCC? And not only the experience, but outcomes, equitable outcomes. So retention rates, completion rates, even attachment to labor market. So we're working to become as obsessed with experience and outcomes as we have been with access, and really bringing that equity lens to that. And also trying to keep focus on felt success. So success, as the institution defines it, might be a different thing than success for a student. And if a student feels successful in what they've achieved, that's great. That's a victory. So just really evolving the thinking from a focus on accessibility, maintaining that, but really kind of tethering it to an equity lens. Really exciting thinking, and we think it's going in great places.
Good, great. Okay, thank you. Gloria, so, what can we encounter at the Mount that you'd like to highlight in terms of accessibility services?
I think that's probably the most interesting part about being fairly new, is that you get to take a survey of all the things that are happening, so that you might not be aware. I don't have a lot of history with Nova Scotia or with the Mount. So coming on, it was like a quick crash learning in all the different ways that departments are focusing on accessibility. And I will say that there's a general tone of really people putting it front and center to make sure that it's not just like a side thought, but like an actually embedded into an institutional approach. So a real commitment. So that's really encouraging, because I think, like all post-secondary institutions, we're creating our committees and our plans to align with the provincial legislation. And well, before COVID happened, we were kind of really gearing up to get that committee work going. And it was a pan-university approach. We had people from every different department, and what was really key was student representation. So I wanted to make sure we had at least 4 or 5 student representatives who could speak about their experience, and make sure that that wasn't just, again, like a side dish, but actually like, the main course of what we're trying to achieve as an institution. So we generally, during a regular term, we serve about 400 students with a small but powerful, mighty team of 4. And there's this real commitment to like individualized planning. And that's what I really appreciate about the Mount. We're small enough to be able to do that. And I think that's really nice. So really, it's not like a blanket approach. And sometimes a UDL approach works, and sometimes it really takes a lot of drilling down and really getting something specific for a student that they need that isn't necessarily UDL. So we kind of play with that relationship a lot. But it really takes the person and what they need, and what they're legally entitled to have as an equitable right to their experience at the Mount. So that's a general approach. And like I said, we are planning lots of things, especially with these changing and learning environments with being online for the fall. So a lot of our efforts currently are being put into communication, making sure our students feel supported. We're going to host an online virtual orientation for the first time, which we've hosted a trial run in January for a student orientation, and we had very little student turnout. And the biggest feedback was people are really shy and uncomfortable going into a room and self-disclosing. So we're hoping that the virtual environment will support that. And maybe, if they can join anonymously, but still get the information, that's really exciting. So we're just kind of putting our energy into that. And we're all still working from home, but we are still very busy. So, but it's good. I do feel like, much like what you said, Joe, there's a real kind of a pivot point happening, like a tipping point of real, like, we just really can't go backwards anymore. And I really feel like the efforts, because when you really take a quick scan across the university, there's a lot of little efforts, and when you put them all together, it can be really quite powerful. And I think that momentum is something that we're definitely trying to support as a department with our work with the government as well. I did want to highlight a couple of small things. We are one of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and Accessibility Dimension universities. So the Mount, our president, signed an agreement that we will, kind of program and focus on the EIDA principles of inclusion and equity. So that's very exciting. And that work is just kind of starting to kind of gain momentum as well. So that's really exciting. And for those who are unfamiliar,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you EIAD?
Oh, sorry.
Did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Equity.
I just wanted, because it's easy for us when we were talking like this, but we have a group of students and potential students watching, and they may not know what that is. So I just wanted to.
And I talk really fast. It's always been a problem.
No, not for you. But the just some of the acronyms, so that people can that are watching on YouTube, and the potential students can pick up on what an EIAD is.
Yeah, so it's equity, diversity, inclusion, and we've tagged on accessibility as an institutional commitment. So we're an EDI, now we are an EDIA institution with Dimension. So it's a government partnership, but it's a real public commitment to make sure that people are aware that we're making this as reflective of our Mount values and what we're going to do, not just in programming, but built environment and you name it. And then the other program I just want to highlight is Mountability. So there's Access Acadia and the CBU program and Mountability. So it's a great program. I'm just recently new to the board. So I think we had 5 students this year that are completing auditing courses, and they will eventually work towards a certificate of completion and allows them access to campus life and campus activities. So it's really interesting, and the students are amazing. So that's just something we don't. Our accessibility services is a bit kind of not detached, but we don't really work with them as closely. Like they kind of a little bit separate because they run through our education department. But it is definitely an option, and we support the work, and then through our student services, of course, that's where we link in. So.
Excellent, thank you. I forgot, I should probably disclose, I'm a student at the Mount right now. I'm doing a PhD in education through the Mount. So I just, in case somebody says, we never said that, but there we go. Quinta, can you tell us a little bit something that you think people would want to know about Dow?
Sure. So I'll start big and then kind of work my way down to the Student Accessibility Center. So I'd mentioned in my intro that Dalhousie was working through our next set of strategic priorities. So we have a new president and a new provost, and the other one just ran out. So it was time. And so the EDI piece, even though there are particular themes that we are exploring, there was an agreement by the entire institution, which, Dal is a pretty big institution, pretty complex. We agreed across the board that EDI would be part of all of our considerations. So, as Joe and Gloria have said, it's embedded in all of the work, or will be embedded in all of the work that we do. So really excited about that. A couple of years ago, and I'll try and keep my remarks brief around this particular piece, but our facilities management crew engaged in an accessibility audit. So in anticipation of the legislation, they went out and measured millions of square footage of Dalhousie property in Halifax and in Truro. Just in anticipation of the legislation, but really to track the architectural barriers. So where are the barriers in terms of just the physical access? And so we are processing all of that information so that we more or less have a heads up of what's to come in terms of where some of our fixes and attention might need to be. And so a really huge undertaking given kind of the size of the campus and that we do have a campus in Truro as well. So really fantastic work by that team. I was struck yesterday by President McNamara at NASCAD, who talked about that accessibility should be core to everyone's job and not just the role of disability services. And so this next initiative I'm really excited about. The Student Accessibility Center at Dalhousie was the administrator of an accessibility fund for faculty and staff. And essentially, we wanted folks to submit proposals that met the UDL principles, so the Universal Design for Learning principles, so trying to design for the broadest group of folks, of participants. And we had several really fantastic projects submitted and approved by faculty members.
So by universal design, you mean that it's designed in a way that anybody, able, disabled, it's good for all people to use, correct? That's what you mean by universal design?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So we are designing our educational programs for the broadest group of learners, particularly with people with varying abilities. Excellent. And so what I really liked about this particular initiative is that the funds that we dispersed were not huge amounts, but they have the potential to make huge inroads and again just make courses more accessible. So complementing in-person labs with virtual labs, There were several projects, and if people want more information, we have a sample of those on our website. I'll put our website in the chat in a little bit, so folks can go look for themselves. And then again, I said I would work my way down. So the Student Accessibility Center specifically, we launched an assistive technology lending library last spring, I believe. We might actually be in 2 years. I can't really kind of post-COVID, pre-COVID, in COVID. I don't really know the time anymore. But we've launched the library. And so we've actually, and when I talked earlier about, our staff being fantastic, we've actually delivered some of that technology to students' homes safely, of course, during the term. And so we have a range of equipment that students have identified that they've needed or required to support them in their classroom, outside of classroom, during their studies, sometimes in their work placement, for example. And so again, on our website, we have a list of some of the equipment that is available. And it works typically like a library. So students identify which piece of equipment or tool that they need to access, and they have it for a minimum of 3-week period. They can renew. It's great. What we really like about this particular initiative is, as part of our staff, we have a technology advisor, and so they actually can do some training with students, and can do it remotely as well. It also gives students an opportunity to try out some of the equipment without actually making a purchase, because some of the tools can be expensive. And so here's an opportunity to learn, to try, figure out if it's going to work for them. And if so, then we could also potentially source some funding for the student. And if not, then they still have access to the library. So some really fantastic things going on. I could go on, but I want other folks to have the opportunity. So
that's a great taste of it. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Jennifer, what's happening over at St. Mary's University?
So at St. Mary's University, we have what's called the Fred Smither Center of Support for Students with Disabilities, and that's where our accessibility team basically lives out of. For the most part right now, a lot of our work is being influenced by COVID-19, and it's actually been quite a learning experience, but also has given us a better perspective, I think, in terms of what it is like to be limited by your environment. And what we're hoping to do is capitalize on that a little bit and use it as a learning opportunity to support faculty and students in gaining a better understanding of disabilities. And our team, just like many people said, we're starting broad, and we're trying to break it down into small, tangible little steps. And for us, it is largely about education. So I know one of the things that we're working on right now is bringing all of our services online. So we're doing a virtual orientation, we're doing virtual intakes, we're doing virtual prep sessions for students, virtual support sessions on how to apply for loans and grants that are available, and just really trying to build our momentum for our students. For St. Mary's, we have had a record number of students with disabilities who have registered for online courses. And it's, Tova said yesterday that technology is the great equalizer. And I think this is a really good example of how that can really be the truth. So in addition to the things that we're trying to do virtually, again, with the core education piece and that proactive piece, is what we're trying to do now is create a number of modules and webinars for faculty about universal design for learning. Because if you sort of are doing your course planning at the front end with disabilities and accommodations in mind, the chances for conflict or people feeling left out or not being able to do something are less. So foundationally, we're working on those pieces as well. And then on a broader scale, we're actually rolling out an exam accommodations policy, which I think speaks to the relational nature of St. Mary's University. St. Mary's has always been and had a reputation for relationship building. And so I think it's great that now we've been able to collaboratively put together a piece of work that allows us to continue to work relationally, but put students at the forefront of sort of the academic voice. Another thing that we're doing is creating a virtual peer space. So again, it's not without challenges, because again, there are barriers around self-diagnosis and there's stigma, and not many people who have a disability within the student group, they may not want to self-disclose. So we're trying to work on some of those stigma pieces with things like self-advocacy workshops. And also one of our staff has been recently trained in something called Inquiring Minds training, and it's more towards mental health support, because we're finding, mental health and disabilities are very much connected, and supporting students is really a holistic approach. And I think this is something that the university really believes in, and I think ultimately is the most helpful for people, is when they have not just one support, but several supports and several people who are on their team. So I think, let me see what else. I think that's about it for now that I can sort of remember. But yeah, that's
very comprehensive. That's great.
Yeah.
Lastly, Katie, why don't can you tell us a little bit about your experiences that you would consider best practices, or things that you have encountered or used or accessed that made all the difference at any of the institutions that you've attended? Oh, muted.
Sorry.
There's always one.
I think there's quite a few. Honestly, the accessibility office itself, especially now that I'm in my graduate program, has been very useful. I've run into more issues with faculty as a graduate student, so just having the resources there to have someone back me up very quickly has been great, because even though I do a lot of self-advocacy, it's much harder when the faculty is just not receptive at all to that information. And I feel like Dal especially has really been prepared to fight with legal or that sort of information, to bring it to professors in a very calming, non-threatening way, but also informing them of sort of what my rights are as a student. So that's been great. And then also, just on a policy level, I think, I'm sure other schools do this now too, but in the beginning, Dal started out by integrating their accessibility policy in with their discrimination policy. So it was one document. And I found that actually quite interesting at the time, because normally it's seen as this auxiliary document where you talk about the rights of people with disabilities, and they're like an auxiliary group that you're going to accommodate. And having it directly in the discrimination policy with like, you can't discriminate against people for their religion, you can't, and like having it all outlined in that document made it a lot easier for me to talk to faculty and staff very directly, and just point to this one document and have it translate very quickly and easily. So I think that was two good examples of things.
Thank you. So I see April Hubbard, who is also our NAW ambassador, is watching the event, and she did have a question for Quinta, but I think, and it was regarding the accessibility audit that she referred to, and whether it involved feedback from students living with disability, or whether it was quantitative. And I believe somebody has already gotten back to her, explaining that it was, there were actually students hired to assist in conducting the accessibility audits, some of whom did identify with having a disability. and they're doing some other community engagement pop-up surveys pre-COVID to reach out to students to get advice on the architectural barriers on Dalhousie campus. But something, I guess I want to bring it a little, so I can't tell, am I trying to bring it broader or am I trying to get more specific? But there was a theme running through yesterday, and also a specific question that somebody had asked about, what supports do you offer in terms of emotional or psychological supports? Not necessarily because there is a primary diagnosis of a psychological problem, but because living with a disability can be exhausting, and being a self-advocate can be exhausting. And I'm wondering, as a student or a potential student who has those all the concerns of a regular new student, plus the added anxiety around having to navigate through, what's available accessibility wise, and what kind of can you offer me any reassurance? Can you offer me a safe place where I can discuss what needs to be done? Maybe I don't even know the right questions to ask or the words to use. Do you know what I mean? Gloria, can you talk a little bit about that for a second?
Yes, once I figure out my mic. I think from the experience from the student, like the biggest compliment that a student can give us for feedback is that this felt like a safe space. And that just isn't just because of their disability. I mean, like a safe space because of any multifaceted aspect of their identity. And when you hear that consistently from the student body, that is reassuring. So I'm confident that our area is a safe space. I know from the approach of our advisor, we have a system technology specialist. It's very it's a very ground level approach, and it's very like, you tell me what you need. Like, there's no voiceover, there's no talking for people. Like, there is an advocacy component, but it's also a partnership, and it's like, let's work on resiliency and self-care and the things that you need so that you can advocate for yourself. But also, there is a lot of recognition for how difficult the work is to always be the one, breaking down the doors. Like, that's not, and you just want to learn, it's just you just want to go to class. And, so I think it's that tone or that kind of approach is really hard to get across to students, because they just get emails and they get a website and they get all this, and it's like, so we just encourage people to just come on in and connect with us. If we could in person, although we are virtually completely available, but connect with us, because we, you drop all that kind of circumstance behind, formality, and you're just talking person to person. And I think, I think that there's a lot of experience in our department, and I feel like I guess that's something I really wish students would be aware of, that if we could get that across in a way that was more like a real person who really genuinely cares and really wants to make you sure you have a great experience. That's really hard to get across, but it is there. It's palpable. I know how dedicated our team is. And I know that from like I said, the shared work that I've been in contact with people in this panel, I know that the work's being done. It's just really hard to get across. But
do you happen to work with Kim and Julie?
I sure do.
Okay, well, somebody on the chat is just very thankful for you and Kim and Julie. So.
Kim and Julie are incredible, and then we have Krista's our testing coordinator, and then we have an admin that's shared for all the student experience, and they're a mighty force of.
You're getting, they must feel good. And Krista, yeah, there you go. I'm wondering if someone feels comfortable speaking to a particular question that we had related to a student that is intending to start university in the fall, who identifies with having PTSD. And the student was wondering where that falls in terms of, supports. Are they eligible for support? Does anyone feel prepared to take that one on specifically? Oh, Quinta, hi.
Sure, I can. Thanks. Yeah, so it's interesting that, and I'm really glad for the question. I had an opportunity to engage with a colleague in a Western university about the entire process around requesting accommodation. And so for us, it doesn't differ regardless of what the disability is or the protected characteristics or what the barrier is. We are still looking for the same information. And so absolutely PTSD would be considered eligible, for lack of a better word, for accommodation. And really the process for us would be, as I mentioned in the intro, it's the student's narrative. So tell me, what do you foresee? What have you experienced as challenges? Where can we support you? And sometimes beyond the accommodations as well. So yes, we can put some things in like extended deadlines or possibly removal of certain texts that could be triggering, for example, like certain content. We can do all of those kinds of things, but where else may the student need some support? And so, at Dal, I'm thankful that we have a full service health and wellness facility. And so we have psychiatrists and counselors and social workers, but there could be other supports that the student may need as well, unrelated to the PTSD. It could be study skills. It could be any number of things. And so as Gloria mentioned, I think, just having the student know that there is someone there to support them. And although we may not be able to be all things to one student, we can certainly ensure that there are connections made with other support services. And whether that's a soft handoff, I know that our staff have physically walked students to other service points on the campus and done some introductions. So, it's really, and we appreciate that, that students can or may feel that they're taking a big chance by sharing this information with us, because we are essentially strangers at the beginning, but just give us the opportunity to build that relationship with you and know that we do in fact, have your back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and part of the great thing about today's panel as well as yesterday is I want to be able, anybody who is watching or will be watching, will at least be able to take away the idea that you are there to serve them, help them, advocate with them, walk the path with them. That's your reason, right? So, because there has been comments regarding, people, just even the anxiety about knocking on the door that says accessibility services and saying, I don't know if I have a disability. It's just that, where do you even start? And Jen, can you maybe mention a little bit about, do you have the type of community at Dal in your accessibility, at SMU in your accessibility services that would, have the students' comfortability in mind, or, to make sure that they feel welcome and safe, I guess is the term.
So the one thing that I feel very confidently about is that the team that we have is very passionate, they're very hardworking, and they are very relationally oriented. I know that relationship building is definitely a priority to our staff. And I think that creating a comfortable space is one of the things that we want to see happen. And that's also, by way of like a drop-in space, right? Just be able to come into the office and just hang out, because we know that informal opportunities to socialize are also great ways to build relationships. And that's how you build safety, is, getting to know people on a personal level, and not treating them like a client. It's about being an individual and connecting with other people. And I think, the other pieces of this are that what makes a safe space is also a peer mentored space. Because I think students are going to feel a lot more comfortable if they're able to get advice from students who have been in the same situation. And I know that at St. Mary's, and especially within the team, we're advocates that people with disabilities need to speak to disabilities. It cannot just be us. So I think we hope that Fred Smithers is a platform, not just basically an end all. Like, we want to be able to give people a voice.
Lovely. Thank you. Oh, Will Brewer's here again today. Thank you for coming to part 2, Will. I just want to go back because there was a question from YouTube. Rory asks, yesterday, the president of NASCAD talked about how about how education sometimes makes our students sick, and that can be a fundamental issue in the way of learning. That's, the very nature of education itself. Joe, do you have any thoughts or comments about that? Or I guess about countering that, or?
Yeah, I would certainly acknowledge the truth in that post-secondary education can be enormously stressful for students with workloads and related demands. Also, folks often away from home, sometimes for the first time, removed from communities and support networks, experiencing financial difficulties, probably in ways that maybe they haven't before, stepping into a whole lot of new life stresses. And sometimes our institutions, through barriers, unintended, but barriers, can exacerbate some of those things. Absolutely. I think that it highlights the importance of the need for mental wellness supports. And I know at NSCC, we've been really working hard to, as the other folks have highlighted, not only provide the services, so we have student services advisors on every campus and counselors and learning strategists and a whole array of supports, including online supports. But to Gloria's earlier point, it's that human relational contact that makes it so much more accessible. Right? If it's just a list of links of support on a web page, that's very, very different than sitting with a human and having a connection. And the other thing I think that's important to highlight is that meaningful support doesn't mean the same thing for every student. So if you're an African Nova Scotian student or a white student or a Mi'kmaq student or a student with a disability, or maybe all of those things, support for you might look different than for someone else in your class or on your campus. And so I think it's very important. We hear from students all the time that it's so important that they can receive services and supports from someone who looks like them. Right? And so we're working hard to ensure diversity within the employees who provide those frontline services, for the counseling, student services, tutoring, all those different roles are just so important.
To yesterday is sometime. Katie, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what Aoife was alluding to yesterday, in terms of sometimes the very thing we're pursuing is also making us sick, and maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I'd say through my own experience that definitely sometimes the educational environment has made my illness quite a bit worse. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people and a lot of support systems that you can access in those times of need, that both in and out of school, that kind of counteract that a bit. But obviously, what the goal is right now, I think everyone would agree, is this universal design for learning. And so we're stuck in a place right now where lectures and things are set up in a way that they've been historically set up. And we're working towards a way to make that a broader, wider spectrum and give a different variety of types of way to learning. But we're still in progress. And obviously, I think everyone here is working towards the goal very hard and doing a lot of work, putting in a lot of effort, but it does take time. So while you're in school, my best advice really is to try and maintain good contact, not only with your disability services officer or whoever is your contact at the school, but also with your friends, your family, and a counselor, maybe at the school as well, things like that. And just try and develop relationships with your faculty members. Because if you can do that, if you start out a conversation with them, some are not receptive, obviously, some very much are though. And if you can come to them and say, you know, the stress of this is making my illness quite exacerbated. I really need to work out a plan where I can reduce that. Some of them are quite willing to work with you without knowing any information. They'll help you out quite a bit. So I think it's a bit of a judgment call on when and where to utilize different resources, but also not to underestimate people's willingness to help you and willingness to try and get you through the program that you're attempting to get through.
That was a good point. That I found that resonated quite a lot at the end when, you know, we seem to often, focus on the, who people we feel may be standing in our way, but and fail to acknowledge that the majority of people really want the students to succeed, right? Well, everybody probably wants them to succeed, but most people are helpful and want to walk that walk with you. I noticed earlier that somebody had asked, and I bring it up. There's been some talk now because we are in this COVID, post-COVID now, it's here, world, that some students were saying, especially students that have different disabilities, had been asking for a very long time to have access or the ability to attend lectures remotely, that sort of thing. But, it really wasn't anything moving forward quickly. Well, here we are, and somebody in the chat room was asking, what are you hearing from students with disabilities in terms of challenges during COVID? So although some things may come out of this, in a positive nature, enhancing our ability to figure things out like what we're doing right now, but also there might be some new challenges specifically for people with disabilities. Gloria, can you speak to anything that you think stands out particularly in terms of COVID and people with disabilities?
Absolutely. As soon as you said that, I was thinking of a student we're working with right now who we have a print shop program where textbooks can be scanned and then ran through a reader for someone with vision loss. But that's a thing you have to physically take to the campus and get them to print. So right now we're trying to negotiate, okay, if I bring you the book and then I'll pick it up and I'll drop it off at their house. And I'm like, that's fine. But that's for someone who lives local. But a lot of our students, they travel they want the experience of coming to Halifax and being in school. So now they're, in Yarmouth without those physical in-person supports. And that has been tricky, and it has highlighted a lot of the gaps of our communication. It's highlighted a lot of our gaps of how do we get information to students when they are bombarded with COVID information to begin with. But then in addition to that, we're sitting here saying, we want to support, but then it's really tricky to get good information that's relevant to where it needs to be. And that's, so it really has highlighted, and not just that, but I mean, you look on the flip side of that, with all courses going remote, not all faculty are technological. So trying to work with, so that's what has shifted most dramatically for us, is that now we always collaborate with internal departments, but now even more so. We work really closely with our teaching and online learning center, because we're doing this liaisoning, which has never happened before. When they're doing back end work with Moodle and we're doing front end work and conversations. And So it's really, I think there's a lot of things happening that maybe the students aren't aware of, but it really is for really quickly trying to catch up with. We don't want to drop the level of student service, but it is definitely not equal. Student service is not equal for everyone. So how do we make sure that, you know, with some reasonableness, that we can still make sure that they get what they need so they can study. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? What about NSCC? Have you any particular issues surrounding COVID?
Yeah, COVID's been a learning experience, you know, for all of us, and as you alluded to, it's kind of helped to shift some thinking. You talk about students who, for maybe years, have been looking to access lectures and learning remotely, and there's been some institutional resistance to that sort of thing. It's not unlike working from home, and so many employers have been resistant to that over time. But here we are, right? We're all doing it. It seems okay. So I think it's pushed us into some new ways of thinking about those things. In terms of the student experience, I guess we're hearing different things. It depends on the type of disability and the individual, frankly. I've heard from some students with mental health disabilities who actually prefer this. You know, if I can stay in the comfort of my home and not have to go and navigate the barriers that I experience in the physical, you know, place that is my school, this is more safe and comfortable for me. So for some people, it's been a positive thing. We do know that for other students who might be relying on on-campus supports, whether technology or whatever the case might be, it's been a very different experience, right? And you know, the term digital equity, that's something that I didn't know what that was until March 2020, but it's suddenly very important to us. And so we've been working hard to get laptops in the hands of students who don't have one, or how do we get Wi-Fi access for someone who doesn't have that? And so really having to help navigate lots of different technological challenges during COVID-19. So it's been quite a test, but I think we're coming through it okay.
And, you know, talking about technological challenges, somebody has a complaint about the technology surrounding the read books that Gloria was referring to, that sometimes they read awkwardly, and you know, that's hopefully all that technology will improve as we're you know, as it becomes universal, right? Which is really the point. So it's 8 minutes after 4, and I wanted to sort of wrap things up, but I thought maybe it would be nice to maybe ask each of you, if I was a new student, and assuming I could come on campus, or you know, had to, and if I was enrolling in university as a new student in the fall, and I think I have a disability, or I do identify as having a disability, what's the first thing I should do? And then I'm going to ask Katie to, at the end, to wrap it up and give us some sage advice, having been a student for a little bit. But Quinta, can you tell us, if I was a student just entering and I felt, you know, that I identify as having a disability, what should I do?
So there are a couple of things, and Gloria had mentioned that this was the first year I think the Mount is doing an orientation, so congratulations. We have been doing what we call our Able at Dow orientation for new from high school students for the past 5 or 6 years. The program was—
what is it called? Able at Dow?
Able at Dow, so ABLE at Dow. It's a program that we developed in consultation with a faculty member in the School of Occupational Therapy. It's a full day session, and it's meant to bring students together. As you know, requesting accommodations can be very process heavy. And so we talk about processes, but we also talk about skill development as well, and have students give them the opportunity to meet other service providers. And we have a parallel session that we offer for parents. So that would be the very first thing that I would recommend, is just to register for that orientation, which we are having online this year. And then to connect with a member of our team so that we can just at least have a conversation. It doesn't mean that we need to follow through, or what your follow through discussion today looks, will be the same in September or even December for that matter. But let's just have a conversation and start that relationship building so we can figure out, we may have to have more than one conversation about what your needs are and how we can support or address the deficiencies in the classroom. So reach out.
Nice. Thank you. And I like that you mentioned that, it doesn't have to be a one-shot deal where you have all the answers all at once, but just start a relationship.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you. Jennifer, what do you, any advice you have for a new student starting school?
So what I would say to a new student would be to ask questions. You have every right to ask what services are available to you, and to ask who is making the decisions, and offer feedback, because I think that we want to learn and we want your perspective. And I would say, get in touch with a staff member. In speaking on behalf of Fred Smithers, any of the staff would be happy to meet with you virtually and to discuss, the services that we have. And that can be something that caregiver or parent can attend. We're very much open, and you can find our contact information on the Fred Smithers website, and we'd be happy to hear from you.
Great. Thank you. Gloria.
I would echo that, Jennifer, definitely, especially with the parent or support folk. Bring them along, make them part of the conversation as well. We found that very helpful. Helps take away some of the nerves of what used to be coming to our offices. So now connect with our office by phone or email. We are still remotely available and very welcome to just talking. I mean, it doesn't have to be an official appointment or an intake interview or anything like that, because we do all those things, but that can be down the road if needed, if you want that. But just connect with us, because you'd be surprised. It's kind of like you put one step in that direction, and then there's, oh my gosh, I didn't realize there was all these things there. So like if we can help bridge that, for new students and for returning students too, things are always changing. So we're just open to having connection and communication in whatever way makes you comfortable. And early would be great. Like if you think, maybe the fall sounds good, earlier the better. And if you have needs that need to be met, then it gives us time, because, we are a small department, but it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room around things, just to kind of make sure that things go smoothly. It gives us a chance to check in with you and make sure you have really what you need, rather than the influx at the fall when we are very, very busy. So yeah, just connect, we're here and open to that.
And I want people to know that, they can ask you anything. Like, there's no wrong questions. Right?
Nope.
Like, people can just pop in if they're curious about, hey, what do you do? Am I wrong?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Katie, any advice that you would give to students who identify as having or think they may have a disability?
I think there's two major things I would think about. The first is when you're deciding where to go to school, visiting the campus itself, or when that's an option outside of COVID, is really helpful to try and get a feel of whether or not like a small school would be better for you, a bigger school would be better for you, sort of understand the layout of the classes and the timetables and things like that. Talk to administration, not just the Disability Services Office, and try and get a better feeling for if a small department is what you need. Because a lot of things that I found in the beginning, I really benefited from going to a small school. And that's because I didn't really know what was going on with me. And so it was better for me at that time to go to a smaller school and have someone I felt like didn't have a abundance of overload of work with other students and was able to have the time to spend with me at quite a great rate at NASCAD, because I was just figuring things out, and that was really helpful. Obviously, if you don't feel that that's necessarily the best option for you, go to a bigger school, look at what they've got to offer, but also, especially at all schools, look at the peer support groups, look at things that the student unions are offering, look at things that the health and wellness centers are offering, and really get like a well-rounded view of the school before you decide where you want to go and even once you've decided, just to be aware of all those options and things that you have available to you to increase your ability to participate. Other than that, I would like to give a shout out to NEADS, which is NEADS, which is the national advocacy body for students with disabilities. So if you ever wanted to get involved in things on that level, they're very helpful. But also just the, I guess the idea that it's not just the Disability Services Office that you want to go to, and you don't need to treat yourself just as a student with a disability. Show up and go to the events that everybody else is going to, and make friends, and that will become your support system. And like, once you feel integrated into the school, it's much easier to go and access different services that they're offering. I think we may have lost Deborah.
I just want to say thanks, Katie. That's some really nice from a student's perspective. So. I think we did lose her.
I think so too. If maybe I can take a moment before, while I think Deborah's trying to get back in. I know that we did have a question that was submitted to us prior about the difference between how accommodations are implemented and valued and adopted in Ontario versus what happens here in Nova Scotia. And so I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. I mean, I certainly could, but
I'd like to speak a little bit about it, just because I think it's, and Katie, you mentioned that too. I mean, most faculty, they want to see you succeed. They want to help you on that path, but there are resistors who sometimes, cause disruptions in a student's learning, path, and then, that's often where we go in a bit more detail. So I feel like, practical, we always go for mediation first, and then we look at what the student what they need. Like, if that comes from the student. So if the student says, yes, please talk on my behalf, or I want to be a part of that meeting, or leave me out of it completely, and can you just go, please talk to them? Then we do that. And then we hope that gets to a good place. But one thing I wanted to comment on was that it doesn't, like, adherence to the policy. We have a policy on the Senate policy. Adherence to that is great in the short term. It gets the students what they need and what they require legally, of course. But that really doesn't do much for like institutional change or culture change or attitudinal, long-term kind of thing. So we always try to bring in the education piece. And if needed, we do have the harassment discrimination advisor, which I work really closely with them, and they're amazing. And when you bring in that external factor, or a chair or a dean, most things, they solve on that level. We hope it doesn't have to go further than that, but at the end of it, it's an equitable access. And if you're being denied that access from a barrier that someone's just digging in on, then it has to happen. But I think it's part of the student experience. We don't want them to have that experience, but it does happen. There is mechanisms in place. But I do agree. I think Ontario has a lot more history with the policies and, of course, the provincial legislation, where Nova Scotia is just kind of, getting in that direction. But I think you're going to see changes. And for example, like with our policy, things like appealing, decisions, like it's not built into the policy. So there's room there. There's room for growth, for change, like that, to have those things more explicit and more direct. So there's always room for change, always, and it changes all the time. So.
I guess I would just echo what Gloria has said. I think in any situation where you're trying to problem solve, that there are steps. right? It's you try to resolve with the faculty first, and then you engage others where the need arises. But if students are watching, and I think the one takeaway that I would like you to have is know that you can challenge this. So if you have a situation where your advisor or accessibility officer has communicated your accommodations to your faculty members, to your professors, and they say to you directly, I'm not implementing that, or it's unreasonable, or whatever, well, first, that conversation should really be happening with us, but that you can bring that to our attention to help resolve. And we'll figure out how to resolve it with you. So whether you want us to take the lead, if we're doing it in partnership, but just know that the final word does not necessarily rest with the faculty member. There's a whole number of things that we need to consider. And again, as part of problem solving, we go through all of the steps. I do see that Deborah's trying to get back in.
Hi, everyone. Not to scare anybody, as a sort of unknowing voice, my name's Kelsey. I'm the producer behind the scenes. So it seems as though Deborah is having some technical difficulties, but we're also up at our time. So
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, good.
See,
Good.
Deborah.
I was trying so hard to get back
There
on to take mine.
we missed you.
But you were just moderating yourself. I could hear you. That was like, okay. That was fabulous. Fabulous. Oh, thank you, everybody. And I'm sorry for that. I know Joe disappeared first. I thought, oh, we're going one by one here. I was hoping, Joe, we were just talking about, did Joe get a chance to give his advice if you were a new student arriving at NSCC?
I can just give a quick 1 minute. I could hear a lot of what other folks were saying as I was being ushered out of the room. Very similar. The college has a ton of supports and resources. We have an accessibility services office, along with counselors and student services officers and Indigenous elders, just all sorts of things that can be helpful. And for a new student coming in, it can be daunting to even begin to think about how to access those things, or what are the right things I need to access. And so one of the things that will happen upon admission to the college is that we'll connect a student with a student services advisor and or a faculty member. And that's an invitation, as Gloria put it, to build a relationship, right? So connect with that person, chat with them, tell them your needs, talk with them about things that might be challenges for you, and really lean on that relationship to get access to the things that you need.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm assuming that, everybody can go to the NSCC website or St. Mary's, the Mount. I won't send you to Katie's private email, but Dalhousie, you can probably search up what student services, and it's probably fairly easy to locate you online if you were a student trying to find the right people to talk to. We all have your names here, so they could even search you in directory by name. And if anyone has any other questions or wants to connect with any of these individuals, then you can always contact us through our Reachability Facebook page, message us, and we'll try and direct you to the right people who might be able to answer your questions. I thank you all for joining us for this lovely day on a Thursday in National Accessibility Week. And hopefully people learned a little bit about, how that it's okay, and it's going to be, you're there to help them and not there to cause any more strife or anxiety, right? So I'm so happy that you came, and thank you again for Katie for coming a second round with us. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Yeah.